Breaking tonight, India has withdrawn an estimated $500 billion in investments from the British economy, marking what experts are calling the most severe financial blow to the UK in modern times. Within hours, Downing Street was in crisis mode. Prime Minister Keir Starmer reportedly made a late-night call to his Indian counterpart, Narendra Modi, a desperate attempt to contain the fallout. Meanwhile, markets across London tumbled into chaos. The Bank of England convened an emergency meeting, and several major British corporations have already announced large-scale layoffs. Economists warn this could reshape Britain's post-Brexit economy for decades. So what triggered this extraordinary chain of events? It began just 3 days ago, during what was meant to be a routine parliamentary address on Britain's relationship with its Commonwealth partners. The speech, broadcast live during primetime hours in India, was closely monitored by Indian officials and business leaders, but at 3:27 p.m., a single remark by the Prime Minister set off an unprecedented diplomatic and economic backlash. Starmer, speaking on human rights, criticized India's governance in Kashmir. "True friendship requires honesty," he said. "We cannot ignore concerning reports about civil liberties in Kashmir. This government believes the situation warrants international attention." The chamber fell silent. Even members of his own party appeared stunned. Foreign Secretary David Lammy looked visibly uneasy, but Starmer pressed on. He announced that Britain would suspend approval of the enhanced trade agreement with India until assurances on human rights protections were secured. Then came the line that would define the crisis. "We are establishing a commission to examine potential reparations for historical wrongs committed during British rule in India." With those words, Starmer didn't just alter British foreign policy. He detonated a diplomatic bomb beneath Britain's most promising post-Brexit economic partnership. Within minutes, the reaction in New Delhi was swift and severe. Prime Minister Narendra Modi convened an emergency cabinet meeting. National television networks broke from regular programming to broadcast from outside government offices. By 11:47 p.m. London time, India's Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman delivered a statement that sent shockwaves through global markets. "Today marks a fundamental reassessment of India's relationship with the United Kingdom," she declared. Prime Minister Modi has instructed the government to immediately implement the following measures. What followed was a list of economic reprisals unprecedented in scale. Withdrawal of all sovereign wealth fund investments from the UK, roughly $300 billion. Suspension of $200 billion in planned corporate investments. Cancellation of $42 billion in defense contracts. Revocation of business visas for UK firms operating in India. And most striking of all, a surcharge on all British imports, effective immediately. Sitharaman concluded firmly, "India remains open for business, but only with partners who approach us with respect." Unfortunately, the United Kingdom no longer qualifies as such a partner. The international reaction was immediate. The IMF expressed deep concern over the potential for global market instability. Japan's finance minister warned of contagion effects spreading through Asian investments in Europe. Even the European Union, despite ongoing post-Brexit tensions, urged restraint, warning that unnecessary economic disruption could worsen the global outlook. Back home, the human cost is already being felt. In Birmingham, William Thompson, a 58-year-old factory manager whose company supplies components to Indian automotive manufacturers, said his firm had just lost $17 million in overnight orders, putting 340 jobs at risk. Across the country, similar stories are emerging, from Manchester to Glasgow, from Edinburgh to London, as British companies with Indian ties scramble to assess the damage. The Confederation of British Industry now estimates that over 175,000 jobs are immediately at risk. And as economists warn of further market turmoil, the question dominating Westminster tonight is simple. What was the Prime Minister thinking? While Prime Minister Starmer and his cabinet defend what they describe as a principled stand, Britain's financial foundations are cracking beneath them. Pension funds have seen billions wiped out in mere hours. According to the Financial Times, the average UK pension lost 4.2% of its value in a single trading day, an extraordinary collapse linked directly to a single diplomatic misstep. On one side, a government claiming the moral high ground. On the other, the world's fastest-growing major economy, India, now flexing its financial power with unmistakable intent. The result is a confrontation so severe, so economically destructive, that even Labour's traditional allies are questioning Starmer's judgment. Former Chancellor Gordon Brown issued an urgent appeal for diplomatic repair, warning of irreversible damage unless relations are stabilized immediately. And then something extraordinary happened. As markets plunged and the pound sank to a 37-year low against the dollar, the crisis moved from financial to personal. At precisely 2:15 a.m. London time, Prime Minister Starmer initiated an emergency video call with his Indian counterpart, Narendra Modi. What was meant to be a confidential conversation turned into a global spectacle after a technical oversight in New Delhi left the feed open to the Indian press. For 17 agonizing minutes, viewers across India, and soon across the world, watched Britain's Prime Minister plead for economic mercy. The footage, now viral, shows Starmer visibly shaken. "Prime Minister Modi," he began, voice strained, "I urge you to reconsider these measures. The consequences for ordinary British citizens will be devastating. We can resolve our differences diplomatically." Modi remained silent. Then, with measured finality, he replied, "Prime Minister, actions have consequences. Britain has chosen to lecture rather than respect. My duty is to protect India's dignity and interests. The measures will remain in place until your government demonstrates genuine change." The call ended abruptly. Sources inside Number 10 say Starmer sat in stunned silence before instructing aides to do whatever it takes to contain the fallout. The optics were disastrous. Within hours, the hashtag #ThatYourStarmerBegs dominated global trends. Centuries of British diplomatic prestige appeared to crumble overnight. Former Foreign Secretary James Cleverly called it the most humiliating moment in modern British diplomacy. Even traditionally sympathetic outlets struggled to soften the blow. The Times ran the headline, "National Humiliation. PM pleads as economy burns." The economic repercussions were immediate and brutal. The London Stock Exchange suspended trading after a 9% plunge triggered automatic circuit breakers, the first time since the 2008 financial crisis. Banking giants were hit hardest. HSBC shares fell 17%, Barclays 14%, and NatWest required emergency assurances from the Bank of England to prevent a potential run on deposits. Credit rating agency. Moody's announced a review of the UK's sovereign debt, warning of a likely downgrade that would raise borrowing costs nationwide. The property sector followed suit. International investors withdrew hundreds of millions overnight, sending London's commercial property values down by 6%. Globally, Britain found itself increasingly isolated. Singapore, Malaysia, and Indonesia, all nations with deep Indian economic ties, announced they would reassess their UK investment portfolios. In Washington, the White House offered only a cautious statement urging dialogue and mutual respect, but notably stopped short of offering support. Meanwhile, panic spread across social media. Clips of Modi's curt rebuke, "Actions have consequences," amassed over 50 million views within hours. For many Britons, it was the moment they realized this was no longer a diplomatic spat. It was a full-blown economic reckoning. British business leaders with strong ties to India are openly questioning the competence of the Starmer government. The economic shock is now cascading through every corner of the British economy. Energy firms are warning of sharp price rises after Indian conglomerates terminated natural gas supply contracts. Technology companies have frozen recruitment as outsourcing partnerships collapse. Universities are bracing for massive revenue losses following a wave of withdrawn Indian student applications. Inside Westminster, what began as a foreign policy dispute has spiraled into a full-blown fight for political survival. Leaked cabinet WhatsApp messages, published by the Daily Mail, reveal the extent of the panic. "We've created an economic sewer crisis," one minister wrote. "The Treasury says this could wipe 3% off GDP. How do we survive that politically?" Business Secretary Jonathan Reynolds reportedly warned of mass unemployment if India's sanctions persist. "We're looking at more than 200,000 job losses, mostly in industrial constituencies that voted for us. This is existential." Chancellor Rachel Reeves was even more direct. "The markets are in free fall. Pension funds are bleeding billions. Inflation projections have doubled overnight. We need to reverse course immediately." Yet insiders describe Keir Starmer as paralyzed by indecision. During an emergency cabinet meeting at 4:30 a.m., the Prime Minister was said to have asked repeatedly, "How did we not see this coming? Why wasn't I warned?" 4 junior ministers have already tendered their resignations, each citing economic collapse and Starmer's humiliating diplomatic handling as reasons for stepping down. More troubling still, several senior Labour MPs representing constituencies with major Anglo-Indian business ties are calling for an emergency party meeting. Rumours of a leadership challenge are no longer whispers. They're open conversation. And Rishi Sunak, the Conservative leader and Britain's first Prime Minister of Indian heritage, has seized the moment with devastating precision. Standing outside Parliament, flanked by British Indian business figures, Sunak delivered a withering statement. This government has destroyed Britain's most promising post-Brexit economic relationship. £500 billion. That's the cost of Starmer's moral grandstanding. And who pays for it? Not ministers with their secure pensions, but ordinary working people who'll pay with their jobs, their savings, and their futures. But the real political bombshell came just hours later. Leaked Treasury documents obtained by the Financial Times confirm the government was explicitly warned about potential Indian retaliation 48 hours before Starmer's speech. If verified, and multiple sources have now confirmed the leak, it suggests the Prime Minister ignored direct economic security briefings to make a political statement. The implications are staggering. A British leader allegedly risking the nation's economic stability for ideological posturing. The Treasury's 5-year forecast reportedly projects cumulative losses of $1.22 trillion, nearly half of Britain's annual GDP. And the damage extends far beyond the immediate market crash. Investment analysts warn that India's actions have triggered a global reassessment of the UK's economic credibility. As Dr. Harish Patel of the London School of Economics explains, this isn't just about India. When a major power publicly withdraws confidence, others follow. The perception of UK stability has been fundamentally shaken. Meanwhile, the Labour Party's poll numbers have collapsed. Once enjoying a comfortable post-election lead, Labour now trails the Conservatives by 9 points, the largest gap since taking office. Public trust in Labour's economic management has fallen to just 17%, the lowest figure ever recorded in modern polling. Inside government, alarm bells are ringing. Treasury officials are working through the night to avert a total financial meltdown when markets reopen. The Foreign Office is scrambling to establish back-channel communication with New Delhi. And business leaders across Britain are pleading for emergency intervention to prevent mass bankruptcies. At this stage, the question is no longer whether Starmer's statement was morally justified. It's whether Britain's economy can survive it. Many economists now warn this crisis could eclipse both the 2008 financial crash and the COVID-19 pandemic in scale and duration. Future generations may study it as a case of how a single diplomatic miscalculation can unravel decades of economic partnership. At the heart of it all stands Keir Starmer, a prime minister who campaigned on steadiness and competence, now presiding over what could become the most severe economic downturn in modern British history. Facing him across the world stage is Narendra Modi, a leader projecting confidence and asserting India's growing economic power. And history has shown, when Western moral posturing collides with Eastern economic pragmatism, economics usually wins. So the question now is simple. Did Keir Starmer sacrifice Britain's economic future for a moment of political virtue signaling? Or can his government still repair relations with India before the damage becomes permanent? Tell us what you think. Should Britain swallow its pride to restore trade? Or stand by its principles, whatever the cost? Share your thoughts below. And stay with us as we uncover the Bank of England's emergency response plan and what it could mean for your savings, your job, and the future of Britain's economy.